Okay, things go from bad to worse for Seguin in 1842. And what happens in 1842 is there are two Mexican expeditions that come up from Laredo and occupy San Antonio. Uh, this is not well known, but twice the Mexican army came into Texas and occupied San Antonio for a brief period of time. I think I might have mentioned this is why the Texas government, in part, wanted a different capital than San Antonio because San Antonio was seen as vulnerable. And it's this second occupation of San Antonio that's going to ultimately lead to the Black Bean event as the Texans try unsuccessfully to avenge the capture of San Antonio. So in September of 1842, San Antonio is occupied very, very briefly. And what happens is the Mexican army, remember the Mexicans are still mad at people like Seguin, Tejanos like Seguin, because these Tejanos had supported the Texas Revolution. So what they do is they spread the word that Juan Seguin was a spy for the Mexican army, that Juan Seguin was working with the Mexican army against the Republic of Texas. And by this time, Seguin had a number of enemies in San Antonio because Seguin had been able to thwart many Anglo plots in which Anglos were going to steal land from Tejanos. So his Anglo enemies in San Antonio beat the drum when they hear these rumors that Seguin was working with the Mexican army. They, what today I guess we would call fake news. They start beating the drum and saying, "Look, we were right all along. You can't trust Juan Seguin. You can't trust Tejanos. They're still Mexican." And we have to watch out for them because they're going to help the Mexican government recapture Texas. So what happens is to Seguin is vigilantes, Anglo vigilantes, drove once again from the city where he'd been born. He grew up in San Antonio. He was a member of the San Antonio elite. His family owned thousands, over 20,000 acres of land in the Seguin area. But he was forced to flee San Antonio in the fall of 1842 after these rumors were put out that he was working with the Mexican army. So he was very, very bitter. In 1858, I think understandably bitter. In 1858, he wrote a memoir and he wrote that he was a victim to the wickedness of a few men. And in a very important quote, one that you'll probably be quizzed on, he says, "I am a foreigner in my native land. Could I be expected to stoically endure their outrages and insults? I sought for shelter amongst those against whom I fought. I separated from my country," and he's talking about now during the Texas Revolution. "I separated from my country, parents, family, relatives, and friends, and what was more, from the institutions on behalf of which I had drawn my sword, with an earnest wish to see Texas free and happy." So Seguin is saying, look, I gave everything to the Texas Revolution in order for Texas to be free and happy, and this is what I get. I get driven out of San Antonio one step ahead of a lynch mob. Now, to show the situation that Tejanos found themselves in, so Seguin's driven out of San Antonio, just one step ahead of a mob. He goes into Laredo, but the Mexican government does not welcome Seguin. Remember, the Mexican government sees Seguin and other Tejanos like Seguin as traitors because they had supported the Texas Revolution. And when he arrived in Nuevo Laredo in 1842, after being driven out of San Antonio, he was arrested and he was given a choice. The Mexican authorities say, "We will execute you unless you join the Mexican army." And so that's what Seguin did. Given the choice of being executed or joining the Mexican army, he joined the Mexican army. And then, once again, as the Mexican army makes movement to come into Texas, his enemies in Texas, his Anglo enemies in Texas, say, "Look, we were right all along. He's with the Mexican army now. He was a spy. He never could have been trusted." But the reality of it is this was a situation that Seguin was just forced into. And so he chose to join the army. He fought in the Mexican-American War against the United States. Um, and as I said before, he's deeply, deeply, deeply embittered about what his experience after 1836. Here he was, a hero of the Texas Revolution, a forgotten hero of the Texas Revolution, and now he's being described as a villain. But the Mexicans don't like him very much either. In the 1850s, things kind of cool off for Seguin. He manages, he comes back, he comes between Mexico and San Antonio quite frequently. He never moves back to San Antonio. Um, by the 1860s, though, he's pretty much stopped coming into Texas because he's getting harassed. And this hero of the Texas Revolution, one of the leading members of a San Antonio family, he dies in 1890. He lives a long life. He dies in 1890, but he dies in Nuevo Laredo, and he's buried in Mexico. He's not buried in Texas. Although, what happens is his remains are moved to Seguin. And every year, the Seguin family in Seguin, they do have a memorial. They do have a service where they talk about Seguin and they talk about his experience. To this very day, they still memorialize the story of Juan Seguin. So, big picture, this is the last podcast for today, at least on Tejanos anyway. Tejanos, strangers in a strange land, friendless. Anglos don't like them. Mexicans don't like them. They're losing their land. Everything goes really badly for them after 1836. They're the big losers of the Texas Revolution.